request. My name is Jim Dunn. I'm the lead pastor here. And now that you're awake, we can continue our Arrows series that we started last week. This is a parenting series that we started last week. And we're gleaning some insight into parenting from the wisdom of an ancient king named Solomon. And Solomon just painted this profoundly deep picture of parenting with the thought of children being like arrows. Now, this is from a song that Solomon wrote that we call Psalms, about the middle of your Bible. And in Psalm 127, he wrote something that a part of it you may be familiar with. Even if you're not really a God, Jesus, Bible person, you might have heard this before in some way, shape, or form. Solomon's the one that said, children are a gift from the Lord, they're a reward from him. But there's more to what he had to say there, and he paints this picture of children being like arrows when he says, children born to a young man are like arrows in a warrior's hands. How joyful is the man whose quiver is full of them. He won't be put to shame when he confronts his accusers at the city gates. And so Solomon just profoundly pictures, man, I think, really what encapsulates the hopes and the dreams and the aspirations of every parent. In this word picture, he gives us the idea that we want our kids to soar. And we might not use that word, but I think every parent has this desire that our kids could soar, that they would fly high and they would fly far and they would fly free and on target like a well-shot arrow. You know, free from the baggage and the hang-ups and the struggles that seem to hold us down so often, that they could soar and fly high and fly far and fly free. And so children are like arrows. And if that's the case, then it's implied that that means parents are like archers. That parents are the ones who would be able to draw the bow that would provide the strength, the momentum to propel our children out. And that we would do that with a purpose and some aim, some intentionality behind that, right? An arrow that's shot without aim, that's negligent, that's reckless behavior. Like an arrow that's shot without aim, it may hit nothing and be wasted, or your arrow could even be lost. But more than likely, an arrow is going to hit something even when it's not aimed. And it might hit something that is destructive for the arrow or dangerous, ends up hurting the person or the thing that it hits. An arrow has to be aimed well as also. And so one of the primary things I hope that you'll pick up on during this series and just be encouraged to is some intentionality around our parenting process, right? To parent on purpose and with a purpose, to aim our arrows well. And I just want to share with you a concern that I have. And I know I'm old, okay? It's been 20 years now since I had a 1-year-old. You know, my children are all grown. The youngest is 21. But as I look at parenting today, a concern I have is that there's a lot of energy put into providing the thrust, a lot of energy put into wanting to advance our children, you know. And today's parent is encouraged to involve their children in all kinds of stuff and extracurricular activities and start them young, and a lot of focus on, you know, advanced classes and tutoring and select leagues and all these things. We may be doing a lot to provide the energy, but sometimes it seems like that's occurring without much aim. Like, what's the purpose behind all that? What's our hopes? What's our aspirations? What's the target that we're shooting at? How are we aiming our arrows? And so the second thing we said last week as we kind of laid this foundation is we need to paint a clear target. And we went to a passage of Scripture that just gives us a little insight into what was going on in Jesus' life between kind of the ages of baby. You know, we show up at Christmas and we hear the story of baby Jesus. And then it's 30 years old before we really know anything else about Jesus. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all about his life and ministry as an adult. And we really don't know much about what was going on from kind of 1 to 2 or 3 to 30. And Luke gives us just a little insight, this snippet we read last week. It says, during that time frame, here's what we know. Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and all of the people. And we said last week, man, that provides a great target to shoot at. Like if these 4 things were to happen in our own target image, that our children were to grow in their stature, okay? That is, that they would grow healthy physically and emotionally. if they grow in wisdom, that they learn right from wrong and have the self-control to do what's right, good judgment. They grow in relationship with God. I mean, if children are a gift from the Lord, then a part of what it, leads us to the life we were created for is having a right relationship with our Creator God. And ultimately favor with man as well, that we can integrate into the society that we live in and be a benefit to that society and live meaningful, fulfilled lives within the context of that society. I mean, those four things, that we'd say those are the keys to a happy life, a successful life. And then the bullseye, that's unique to every arrow, to every child, maybe unique to every parent. Your ultimate biggest goals and dreams and aspirations for your child, so to speak, that perfect bullseye, don't have to look like mine, but they fit within this general context of growing in stature, wisdom, favor with God, favor with man. And then we said, hey, we're going to walk through this thing kind of in phases. Let's do something a little different this time and really kind of narrow in on what we felt was the best, most practical advice to equip and encourage parents at each phase. And I gave you this last week, this resource. It's called a Just a Phase Timeline. And those were in your worship guide last week. If you didn't get one, you weren't here, I have more copies of this available at the back. Just ask for it on your way out today. But it kind of walks through some key things to think about in each phase, each year of your child's life and development, and particularly in their spiritual development. And this resource actually guides a lot of what we do in our children's ministry from 0 to 12, even on to 16 and 18 here at the Quest Church. And so today we're going to dive into this idea of walking through each phase and talk about parenting the 0 to 5 or 6 year old in the infant and toddler phase of parenting. And so I thought we'd call this message Arrow Making 101. But then I kind of thought, yeah, that sounds like a sex message, doesn't it? Like, you probably already figured out how to make an arrow, okay? Or if you haven't, you will. And so that's probably not the best title. Let's go with arrow shaping, all right? We're going to go with arrow shaping as the title. Because from 0 to 5, you don't really have an arrow yet, okay? You've got a stick or a branch or a piece of wood in some way that is going to be molded and shaped into an arrow. And it's not, this thing is not ready to launch, right? You're not going to send this flying high and far and free at any target in this stage of your development of your arrow. And you're not going to send your 0 to 6 year old flying high and far and free at any target. You'll be lucky if you can keep them rounded up on a day-to-day basis, all right? So we're just beginning to shape our arrows and prepare them for what's next. And we've said all along, and it's so important to understand, ultimately we're not raising children. We're raising adults. That's the goal, to be able to release them with the thrust, with the momentum, with on target to hit the bullseye and become all that God created them to be. And so to parents of younger children in the 0 to 5 stage, one of the things I just want to remind you of, and this is true throughout the parenting journey, that there's a part that God has in this and a part that we play. As a matter of fact, if you were here last week, I gave you a next step reading from Psalms 139. And King David there talks about his ideas that God had been at work shaping and molding him even in his mother's womb, right? And that God had plans and purposes for him before he was ever born. And the realization of that is so important to us as parents. That God, listen, and I know this is even hard to imagine, but as much as you love your child, God loves your child even more than you do. And he loves you even more than you can imagine. And so he's got a part in this all along the way. And I would suggest to parents of young children to understand that God's part is probably even bigger than your part in this stage of the journey. I think there's the next stage where your part becomes even more significant. But at this stage of the journey, your child from 0 to 6, they're wired up by God to just kind of naturally grow through that phase as long as we provide them with some basic things, some simple things, not necessarily always easy, but simple things to provide them with. If we do kind of 3 things, they'll just kind of naturally grow through the 0 to 6 phase in stature and wisdom and in favor with God and in favor with people. And you don't have to be a child psychology expert or know much about child development. And you don't have to be wealthy or go in debt to provide all of these things. The reality is you don't even really have to do these things all that well, and your child will still make it through the 0 to 6 phase, usually in pretty good shape. Right? Just thinking about that. Your child's been created by God to just kind of naturally grow with 3 things, okay? If you provide some food and shelter, right? Clearly, a 0 to 6-year-old child, you're going to have to provide them with some food and shelter. And hopefully it will be healthy food and it will be comfortable shelter. But here's the truth. I've been in a number of third world countries, and I have seen children growing fairly well with food and shelter that most of us as Americans would find disturbing, that we would look at and go, I can't believe that's all they have to eat and that's where they live. And yet I've seen children growing and thriving and happy and doing well. Now, listen, I understand there's extreme poverty and there are needs. And listen, we're involved in meeting those through our partnership with Manna. We care about children who don't get enough food to eat, who don't have the basic necessities in life. And so we sponsor orphanages and feeding centers and medical clinics. As a matter of fact, we just had a group of 20 folks from the Quest last Tuesday that returned from a trip to Guatemala to be a part of the mission we have, to make a difference. But I'm just talking about the fact that children generally, and especially most children in America, they're going to grow just fine with basic food and shelter, And it doesn't have to be all organic, GMO, farm-raised, all that top food. And the shelter doesn't have to, your 0 to 5-year-old doesn't have to have the finest of everything. They'll probably be okay with just some basic food and shelter. They need a parent example. The children will grow in wisdom pretty naturally through the 0 to 6 phase by watching the example of other human beings around them. I said last week, this is the mimic phase. The primary way we're learning from 0 to 6 is by watching others and seeing what our parents do and watching what goes on in the world around us. We don't necessarily understand the why of it all. We just know that's what other people around us do. And so much of that 0 to 5, 0 to 6 development, it's going to happen whether parents put a whole lot of effort into it or not. I mean, you can be that parent that is all about your child walking early, and you want them to walk, and you can't wait for them to walk, and you read all the books about how to help them walk early. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to be constantly telling them to sit down after that, all right? They're going to walk, and you're going to be like, come back, get over here, stop, don't run. And you be that parent that wants your child to talk early, and you do all the things, talk to them, make sure they all that stuff. And you know what's going to happen? You're going to tell them to shut up a lot after that, right? You're going to spend all of that time. Isn't it crazy? We talk to the baby. We can't wait for the baby to talk, and then we're going to spend the next 5 years telling the baby to shut up. And so, you can be all into that stuff and do all the things. And I'm not saying it's not important to be involved in your child's life, but you can be kind of ho-hum about those things. And your child's still going to walk, and they're still going to talk. It's just going to kind of naturally happen as they're involved and they see the examples around them. Children will just begin to grow in wisdom. They'll learn stuff by watching their parents and other human beings. So maybe the most important thing you can do is choose those examples well. Whatever you want your child to learn at that stage, they're going to learn by example, and you have great control over the examples that are influencing them. So they need some parent example. And they'll need some protective care, basic discipline. I know that's not a popular word, but a child at this stage of their life, 0 to 6, they need some protective care. They need to be told no and stop from doing stuff that might be harmful to themselves or harmful to others. They're going to need to learn to follow some basic commands that are for their benefit. They're going to need to understand some simple boundaries and have age-appropriate consequences when they stray outside of those boundaries just to protect them, right? A child at that stage of development, you can't leave them to their own desires and to their own means because they can't protect themselves, and they are even prone to endangering themselves. And so they need a little care. But again, There are overprotective parents who I think, every little thing and every little detail they got to be watching out for. And there are other parents that I see sometimes, I'm like, you're a little underprotective. Like you could probably, I wouldn't let them run out in the street like that. But, bottom line, you can do all those things well or not so well. And the reality is most kids kind of come through the 0 to 5, 0 to 6 range age about the same. And I'm not saying that your role's not important, that we shouldn't be intentional about our parenting at this stage of the child development. But the reality is the playing field is pretty level at kindergarten. And I know, like, your child's reading at a 3rd grade level and they're only in kindergarten, but I'm just telling you that does not mean that they're going to be valedictorian and go to Harvard and become a doctor, okay? I'm glad, but the other kids kind of catch up along the way. My son Joel, when he was 4 years old, he had legs like tree trunks. We called him Stump, okay? And so we took him down. We had a little fair. We lived in a rural community. They had a little fair every year. They call it the Little World's Fair. And at the fair, they had a pedal tractor pull. So you got on the tractor and pedaled it and pulled this load. And my son Joel, at 4 years old, he pedaled the tractor 40 feet further than any other kid his age, okay? He was the strongest kid in the county. I was like, man, I'm the proudest dad ever. Right? They literally said, we probably need to see his birth certificate, because it just seemed unnatural. He was a strong kid. But it didn't translate into Olympic greatness, okay? It's like there's been nothing that has necessarily come out of that because the playing field just levels up. He wasn't, it didn't make that big of a difference. Here's what I'm saying, and what we want to say to parents in the 0 to 5 range. The arrow shaping process in that stage, it's not a precision task, okay? You're knocking off the rough edges. You're beginning the process of shaping that arrow. You're starting to carve that basic shape. And God has wired your child up to grow pretty well through that phase when their basic needs are kind of met. And so for parents of 0 to 5-year-old children, right? And what we're trying to do in this series is just bring something practical in each phase. And here's the most practical thing we thought we could say to parents of young children. Give yourself a break and get some rest, okay? Give yourself a break, get some rest, because you're going to need it for what comes next. Like, here's my point in that. And again, I know I'm a little older, but I see social media in particular kind of driving a culture of over-parenting the 0 to 5-year-old in the sense of, as young parents, there's this feeling like we have to involve them in everything. We've got to make sure we give them every opportunity. We've got to make sure, they get the front of the line and everything that goes on. If we don't do it now, and if we don't have this perfect life for our 0 to 5, then they're going to lag behind everybody else. And parents of young children, you just need to know that's just not the case. You do some simple things, and even sometimes if you're not doing them all that well, your 0 to 5-year-olds, what they need most is just to know they're safe, just to know they're loved, just to have kind of a peaceful home environment. And I didn't just think that up on my own, okay? That's not just coming from Jim. In preparation for this series, literally I pulled together a panel of folks who have children all the way from 1-year-old to 27 years old. And we talked about what are the issues, challenges we faced as parents, what are we seeing in parents today. And as we talked about this issue of younger parents, what was especially clear, and from those ones that had younger children at this time, is just this feeling of overwhelmed and exhausted and just wore out because it is intensive to parent children from 0 to 6 years old. They require almost constant care. And if you make that even more difficult than it already is, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to stress yourself out, which is going to stress the kids out and stress the family out. And so literally the most practical, we think, best advice we could give you is to take a step back, take a deep breath, give yourself a break sometimes, and get some rest. And to help make that more practical today, I'm going to bring some guests to join me with some very practical tips, all right, for parenting the 0 to 5-year-old age. So, ladies, would y'all come on out? And I know we got some chairs for you here. Their guys will get out. So, yeah, pretty good group here. This is Mandy Weiniger right here. Mandy has children now. Her youngest just graduated high school, but she has 2 children 4 years apart. And so she lived the journey of parenting 2 children, ages 0 to 5. Meredith Dunn has 4 children. The youngest of those is now 21. And we got one of our daughters. She was 16 years old before she came into our home. But at one point in our journey, Meredith had children from 0 to 5, 3 of those at a time. And then Jen Hartman down here on the end is just now seeing the light at the end of the tunnel of the 0 to 5 journey. Her youngest is 5 years old, but she has 3 children that were she's just now, they were all 0 to 5 at one time. And so she's just kind of emerging from this phase. And they were all part of this panel as we kind of sat down to talk about the challenges and some practical advice for parenting. And they just had such incredible insights that honestly, I could get up here and share them, but it wouldn't be nearly as good as them sharing them. And then number 2, it is, to my family, especially my kids and my wife, it's laughable that I'm teaching a parenting series right there. They're like, he don't know, so I thought we'd bring in the big guns today, so to speak. And here's the thing, not only do these ladies appear to have survived that parenting, but they're doing good. They all are thriving and doing pretty good, so there's hope for you, right, that you can make it through. Maybe that's the most help we give to the young moms today, is you might survive this, okay? So, Mandy, I know you had some great insights about how in the busyness of parenting and the labor-intensive part of, parenting little children, one of the things that can easily kind of go by the wayside is our connection with God. And that ends up impacting our parents and parenting in a lot of ways. And so how do you make time and how do you stay intentional about that connection with God when you're parenting the 0 to 6-year-olds?
It's funny, when I look back and try to remember the time when my kids were 0 to 5, I really don't remember all that much. And I think it's because I got like 1 full year of sleep over the whole 5-year period. But what I think I remember the most is just feeling really overwhelmed all the time. I mean, here were these itty-bitty beings who depended on me for their very survival. I don't know whose bad idea that was. But, in addition to just trying to make sure they lived through the day, there was this huge to-do list that I felt like I needed to take care of. I mean, there was house cleaning and make sure they got fed and bathed and laundry, and sometimes I was working outside the home, and, there was church and there was play dates, and the list just went on. And what generally fell off my to-do list was any sort of time with God. But I think what I found when I really looked at it was I was coming at it wrong. So when I thought of time with God, I had this picture in my head of, a Bible and a journal and a study or devotional book and 30 minutes to an hour really digging deep with God. And since I couldn't get a shower on a regular basis, I didn't see that happening anytime soon. So I just would let it just go all together. Here's the thing that I learned, though. I was treating time with God as if he were some sort of teacher and I needed to turn my work into him every day. Like, here, Mandy, here's your A+ for doing your daily work today. But the truth is, God's really more like the best friend who sits down and listens to you rant and cry and then gives you a hug and says, come on, let me help you clean your house today. We just got to face the fact. If we're honest, the first 5 years of our kids' lives are exhausting. And they have way more energy than we will ever have for the entirety of our life. And we desperately need this time with God to nourish our spirits and our souls so we have the energy to continue to work with them. But we don't have to approach it like he's a college professor. Instead, we need to think of him as this friend mindset. So maybe you only get 5 minutes with God. Okay, take the 5 minutes. Sit down, read one verse, just one verse, and say, hey, God, I have mom brain, and I have no idea what I just read, but could you maybe just work this around in my brain so I get from it what you need me to hear today? And also, could you make sure I don't kill my kids today, because prison's starting to sound like a vacation. Maybe it takes you 2 years to get through one book of the Bible. That's okay. That's not something to feel guilty about, because this isn't something to check off your to-do list. This is something about building you up. This is something about giving you that replenished energy you need to work with your 0 to 5s. So Galatians 5 tells us that the fruits of the Spirit are love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Note, those don't come from us. This isn't something that naturally we produce. These are things we get as a gift from God. We get that from connecting with God. And here's the great and awesome thing about God. God can take that 5 minutes of time, that tiny investment, and he can multiply that by the thousands and what he gives back to you in energy and peace and patience to help you get through this time period.
Man, that's good, Mandy. Yeah. Let me just say to all of us, because I know it's a parenting series, we're talking 0 to 6 today, and so some of you are like, well, this doesn't apply to me. But in every stage and area of our lives, when we get busy, the thing we often push to the side is our time with God. And I want you to read Galatians chapter 5 this week. It's your next step. Read verses 16 to 26. And notice what happens when we follow the desires of our sinful nature. Paul's going to talk about things like hostility and quarreling and jealousy and envy. And then what happens when the Holy Spirit produces in us because we've kept our connection with God. And listen, if you find yourself angry and quarreling and chaos and going on in your life, can I suggest it might have something to do with your time with God? And you've gotten so busy you push that to the side, and the results are not what we want when what we need in our lives the Holy Spirit produces. And certainly in parenting, as Mandy said, those things are we desperately need, and God gives us those in our connection with him. So stay connected to God. Powerful insight. Now, Meredith, I know that you were parenting 3 children ages 0 to 5. I happened to be your husband during that time. And let's be honest, I wasn't a lot of help. There's just the reality of that. I'll own up. But one of the things I really appreciate is that even in the midst of all that I know, was going on in that time frame in our lives, you really prioritized our marriage and staying connected to each other as spouses. And thanks for that, number one. But how did you do that, and why was that important to you, even when we were raising the little kids?
Because of our backgrounds, we made a choice early on that I would be a stay-at-home mom until the kids went to school. And so we were living in Kansas when the kids were that age. And at one point, Jim literally was working 4 jobs so that I could stay at home with the kids. So trying to find that connection time was difficult because he was gone so much. But he provided money. That's what I needed you for. So that, but no, it was, but I had seen so many families, so many couples, and especially in my own family, I saw this a lot. Parents got their kids raised and out of the house, and they didn't like each other. They just tolerated each other. They were just roommates, or they just divorced. And we had already talked about we didn't want that kind of marriage. We wanted something different. So I knew we were going to have to make that connection. And so I learned this real quick one night. Jad, our oldest, was 6. Joel was 3, Stump. And Monica was about 1. And Jim had a night off. We were going to go out for a date, just going to, out to eat, going to the show. Melissa, one of our teenagers, is over to watch the kids that night. And as we're getting ready to walk out the front door, Joel grabs onto my leg and is doing that, just screaming, "Don't leave me, Mom, you can't leave me." And he's just crying, and I'm feeling guilty, and I'm starting to get all teared up, thinking I can't leave him. I'm going to scar him for life. Jim's trying to pull him off of me. Melissa's trying to pull him off of me. And it's just getting ugly. And Jad, our 6-year-old, grabs him, pulls him off of me, spins him around and looks at him and goes, "Let her go. She'll be a nicer mommy when she comes back."
True story. True story.
And, Jim's dragging me out the door, and I'm thinking, am I that bad of a mom? But I realized that the 6-year-old got that at times I needed to remember I was also Jim's wife, that I needed to be dated. I need to be a girl still, not just the mom. And so we made a point of we have to stay connected. And the problem is at that stage, I know for us, we didn't have the time or the money necessarily to go out once a week, maybe not even once a month at times. So I decided we had to make that connection even if we were staying at home. So we made a priority that there were certain nights when Jim would come home that he knew it was going to be pizza night. And we were going to have frozen cheap pizza so that I didn't cook. I saved energy for whatever he might want to do later on. And Jim ate that frozen pizza with a big smile on his face, knowing that it was pizza night was a good night. And the kids would go to bed a little bit early, and we could just sit down, whether we watched a movie at the house or just talked, maybe, went out in the yard and sat, just looked at the stars, whatever it was, we connected. Because I realized when there was tension and problems between me and Jim, the kids acted out and were a lot worse. When there was peace and calm and we were good, the kids were a lot better. And so I realized we needed a strong marriage to build a foundation for our children to have a good life. And as long as they knew mom and dad were okay and that foundation was okay, they were going to be okay. So that was how we did that, was pizza night and just making that connection.
Good. Stay connected with your spouse. I felt like, please. I felt like we needed some type of verse here. So admittedly, this is somewhat out of context, but it's still pretty good, okay? Hebrews chapter 13:4 says, let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. So in parenting, we would say, teach your kids to honor your marriage. Let them know your marriage is important, that it's a priority, and then kick them out of the bed, all right? They defile the bed, all right? Don't let your kids defile the bed. So I know, the modern parents like to let their kids sleep with them, but if they're coming between your connection with your spouse, they need their own room. And yeah, okay, so anyway, we're just trying to help you out here, all right, as best we can. We think Jen should just be teaching this whole series, actually. Like, if I could have got Jen just to teach this, it would have been great. As we sat around and discussed this, Jen just has some great insights. And one that really stood out to me was Jen's emphasis on the idea of consistency, of just staying consistent, and some basic routines and structures that allow our kids to kind of know what's expected of them. And so, Jen, talk about the importance of that and kind of how you kind of maintain that consistency in the craziness of having 3 kids, 0 to 5, right?
I know for me personally, I like to know what to expect, and I think kids are a lot like that as well. Just the daily routines help keep Josh and I as the parents on track, and they also give our kids a sense of security and kind of knowing the normal patterns. Even when it comes to eating and sleeping, the eating and sleeping, working those times into the daily routines can really make a big impact. I know how I get when I'm hungry and tired. So really making sure kids are full and well-rested will go a long ways in kind of avoiding those outbursts and just the general crankiness. But over the years, our daily schedule has definitely changed, and even seasonally there are shifts. I know just getting to church on time in the summer is a struggle sometimes, but overall our kids know what to expect. There's general wake-up times and bedtimes. We pray and read together at night before we go to bed. There's certain things that they know they need to do before they can be on screens when they're at home. There's just a certain family culture that Josh and I want in our home, and so we try to set up daily routines that really cultivate that. But beyond the daily routines, consistency in general is just so huge. When we as parents respond to our kids and discipline our kids consistently, they know what to expect. They learn how to act, unfortunately by testing those limits, but they gain a sense of security and kind of knowing what flies and what doesn't. I know in our home, after dinner, our kids know to clear their place and wash their hands and face. They know this because it's been said to them literally hundreds of times. But what wouldn't be fair is if we kind of said that offhandedly and then didn't really enforce it. A couple weeks down the road, go off on them about why they never clean up after themselves when dinner's over. So you got to set that expectation, but then you also have to consistently enforce it as well. Another example of consistency is just in the way that we communicate with our children and meet their needs. Everyone who's a parent knows the struggle of having a screaming toddler. Those outbursts tend to come out of nowhere, and they aren't good communicators at that point, so it's kind of a terrible guessing game where there's no real right answer. So how can you in that moment communicate to your kids that you love them, but the screaming has to end? I know what worked in that 0 to 5 age range especially is just to reassess their basic needs. Is the kid hungry? I know those applesauce packets have saved my butt so many times. Is the kid tired? Maybe it's not even nap time, but you know they slept like crap last night, so go ahead and give nap time a try. If you know the kid is well rested, they're not hungry, just try to change up something. If you're at home inside, try grabbing some chalk or bubbles and run outside for a little bit to play with them. If you're out and about, running errands, and you're able to go home for a little while, try that. Honestly, a lot of the times, just strapping those kids in car seats and going for a drive worked wonders. A lot of times they'd end up falling asleep. You could swing by the drive-thru, grab a drink, and just stay in the van and enjoy some peace and quiet. But my point is this. You can communicate consistently with your kids that you love them, but the behavior has to stop. But then you're also kind of helping them along and showing them how it can stop. But the last thing I want to share is just that you're the parent. So you get to decide what kind of family routines and family culture you want in your home. And the routines can change. If something isn't working, then you're the parent. You get the prerogative of changing that up. I know for us, there were seasons in life where we had infants and toddlers, and our daily routine looked a lot like go to work, come home, and if we could just stay home, that was perfect. And then there are other seasons where we had toddlers and preschoolers, and maybe signing them up for a class at the Y or going to story time was fun for them, and it gave me a chance to connect with other parents. So you're the parent. You get to decide what's important for your family, and just being consistent and setting up routines that will just really enforce those family cultures that you want will go a long way in keeping you sane and also giving your kids that sense of security that they need.
That's good, Jen. Thank you. I said last week that on this point of consistency, that chaos is always driven by confusion. When we don't know what to do and what's expected of us and what we're supposed to do next, then we get chaos. And I think so many times in the life of our children, when we're unclear about our expectations, when we're wishy-washy about how we're enforcing those expectations, when we're not creating some clear rhythms that they can function within, then we get the chaos that drives us crazy. And a lot of times it's about stepping back and saying, am I being consistent and clear enough that my kids know what I'm needing for them as a part of this stage of their journey? So, ladies, thank you so much for joining me today. Man, I appreciate y'all very much. Good stuff. And so just some practical things, you know what, that hopefully we can help. I know we just scratched the surface of parenting 0 to 5-year-olds today. I know it's way more challenging than just a few simple tips that we've given. But just at the basic level, staying connected with God so that you have that inner reserves you need, you know. Stay connected with your spouse. And single parents, you know, our hearts go out to you who don't have that. But if you have a spouse, stay connected, be consistent together, make your marriage a priority. And one of the things I was going to mention when Meredith talked about that, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, on this deal, because we know many people struggle to find childcare and things like that. So Friday night, August the 30th, the staff of the Quest Church, we're going to provide childcare here at the church for 3 hours free of charge, okay? So you can bring your 0, we'll take them all the way from the babies through 12 years old, bring them to church Friday night, August the 30th. We'll provide the child care from 7 to 10 for you to get out and have that date night. We want you to practice what we preach, and so we're going to make that happen for you. And all you got to do is go online and register on that or through the app. Just let us know you're going to bring your kids up that night so we can prepare appropriately, and we'll make sure that you get a chance to have that date night. Stay connected with your spouse, and then just work on consistency. Staying consistent may go a long way in helping you survive parenting your 0 to 5-year-olds. And remember that God has a part in this. I think sometimes we get stressed out because we don't trust God enough in every area of life, but certainly with our children. And I love what Jesus said. Jesus said that he had a gift he wanted to give us in relationship with him. John 14:7, he said it this way, I'm leaving you with a gift, peace of mind and heart. And the peace I give is a gift the world cannot give. So don't be troubled or afraid. And I know there's a lot that troubles us and we're fearful of, and peace seems to be the thing we most lack in our society today, isn't it? And when you're parenting 0 to 5-year-olds, just a moment of peace, right, would be a big deal. And Jesus says, I came to give you that. And so lean into him, trust him, stay connected with him, stay connected with your spouse, stay consistent. And for good or bad, like whether you're enjoying this phase of their journey or you're waiting for this phase to be over, remember this, it just won't be like this for long.